Welcome to the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I'm Deborah Herlax-Enos, a small-town girl turned TV nutritionist and healthy living expert. I design health programs for the average guy or gal, including those average guys named Metallica. On September 1st, 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I asked every oncologist the same question, why did I get cancer? But none of my doctors had good answers for me. I wanted answers, and that's why I started this podcast. I want to help you to lower your cancer risk and provide self-care tips for those in the battle. I'm getting answers, and I want to share them with you. Who would have ever thought I'd be talking to an archaeologist about how to prevent cancer? But I tell you, today's podcast is fascinating, where I literally talk to what I call the Indiana Jones of food. Dr. Bill Schindler has had a special on National Geographic. He's written a book called How to Eat Like a Human. And many of my questions to him were, how do we prevent chronic disease and cancer based on the research he's done by following different types of indigenous peoples all over the world? So my big takeaway with Dr. Schindler is when he told me that our gut is 60% smaller than it should be to get optimal nutrient density from our food. So what do we do? And then he started talking about basically like how our great-great-grandparents ate and what they had to do to process their food so that they could get more nutrient density out of it. This might be things like fermentation, making sourdough bread or buying sourdough bread at your farmer's market. He was telling me that it's literally impossible to get enough nutrients without using some of these techniques like fermentation. Listen to today's podcast where Bill takes us through a lot of interesting techniques, how to shop at your supermarket, how to shop at your local farmer's market, all in an effort to prevent disease. Okay, Dr. Bill Schindler, we met a year ago at my National Nutrition Conference. I loved our conversation. And I always kind of start a podcast by saying, I'm super excited because I am that person. But can I now say I'm super excited on steroids? Because I want to know, what can an archaeologist teach me about not getting cancer again?
Well, I am super excited as well. So, that's a fantastic question, because I have been searching my entire life to learn how to nourish myself, and more recently, obviously, how to nourish my family, and really more recently, nourish the community. And I never realized that my interest and all of my training in archaeology was going to be the key to all the answers I was looking for.
Isn't that just so crazy? I mean, I'd like to dive in too with, you've always had food challenges. Mm-hmm. Then you became a wrestler, wrestling Division I. And we all know, we've all known some wrestlers in our lives. Their relationship with food is pretty horrendous, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Especially, it's a little bit better now because a lot of the regulations, NCAA regulations, have changed for the better. But in the early 90s when I was wrestling, it was horrid. In fact, my third year in college, I think 3 college wrestlers died. Not from my team, but three different teams. 3 kids died from cutting weight related issues. Yeah.
Gosh. And so I would imagine, because you've had kind of a challenging, that's a very nice way of saying it, a challenging relationship with food pretty much your entire life. Is that what drove you into archaeology, which connect the dots for us? How does that even happen?
No, it was actually, there were 2 tracks that were running throughout my entire life. One was this incredibly unhealthy relationship with food, battling with my weight, and later on with all sorts of metabolic disease, and loving to cook, trying to learn how to feed all that is happening at one side. On the other side was this sort of back to nature. My dad had me hunting and fishing and trapping and camping all the time. And I was connecting with my environment, and he loved trying to collect arrowhead. Actually, together, we've still never found an arrowhead. I've found, as an archaeologist, many, but he and I together would walk fields looking for things. And when I was a kid, we had no idea what we were looking for, but this sort of love for the past, love for history, love for prehistory, love for the outdoors was happening as another track. And I know it sounds so strange today because, our understanding of our necessity to connect with food, our understanding of the power of what ancestral diets can tell us, things like, importance of things like grounding, for example, like that was not in my mindset for, in the 70s and the 80s when I was growing up. And so I'm doing both of these things and thinking the entire time they were two completely different tracks. And it wasn't until, almost 20 years ago that I realized that they needed to come together, and they really meld together very, very well. And the answers, I've done South Beach, I've done Weight Watchers, I've done, I've done just about any major diet that I've done, and none of it ever felt right. And it wasn't until I started to connect all those other parts of my life and my interests that I really got those answers, or at least started to get the answers.
And can you say now that you enjoy eating? Enjoy your food?
I enjoy every part of eating, but just as important, every part of it. Getting my food, meeting farmers, processing food, cooking food, sharing food, sitting down at a table. And that's what real true nourishment is all about. For most of my life, I thought, okay, tell me how much protein and fat and carbohydrates and vitamin A and vitamin D and all these things that I need in my food, and I'm going to be healthy. And what I've more come to realize, obviously much more recently, is truly nourishing yourself is meeting your biological requirements, but also as humans meeting our cultural requirements, our emotional requirements. All of those things together is what true nourishment is all about. And until you can connect with your food properly and have that healthy relationship with food, it's unattainable.
I love that so much. And you've used the word nourish.
Yeah.
How many people actually think about nourishing themselves when they're on, some sort of, this diet and that diet, South Beach and keto and intermittent fasting? Not that those aren't, viable options for many people, but are you looking at food as friend or foe?
And that mindset is so important. I mean, one of the first things that I found when I really started to understand our ancestral dietary past well is obviously there's so many differences between how we were eating thousands of years ago and how we eat today in the modern industrial food system. But one of them is there was a great study, and I haven't been able to find it since I read it. I kind of read it, set it aside, and I've never been able to find it. But it was about 8 or 9 years ago. And the study, if I remember correctly, looked at a whole bunch of American grocery stores. And what they found was that something like 85% of the advertising on packaged food boasted about what the food doesn't have in it. Like the advertising that was marketed to the consumer was what isn't in the food. It's either fat-free or low sodium or low sugar and low whatever. And many of those things we shouldn't have in our diets. It's not the point. But the point was the marketing was looking, when we decide how we're going to be shopping to feed ourselves and our families, we're looking for food that's absent of something. And the reality is in the past, when our ancestors were just figuring out how to feed themselves and creating technologies to exploit different nutrients from the environment, it was always the exact opposite. How can I get the most amount of nutrition while my body is doing the least amount of work? The mindset today is, hey, how can I get the least amount of stuff from my food while my body is working really, really hard? I mean, how many people have heard we can eat lettuce because if we eat lettuce, our bodies, our digestive tract has to work harder than the calories that it actually gets from the lettuce, so we're actually going to lose weight getting lettuce? Or how many people go to the gym so that they can just burn calories so they can eat more food? And it's the exact opposite of the way that we've been thinking about how to approach food for 99.9% of the time we've been on this planet.
Okay, that completely makes sense. And I would imagine if our focus is on what this doesn't have, we're not focused on what it does have and what it can do for us.
Right. And it isn't to say that we shouldn't. It isn't to say the things that some of those things we shouldn't have sugar in our diet, that sort of thing. But if your entire focus on your worldview and how you should be eating is focused on making sure your food doesn't have stuff in it and you're low calories and low fat and low this and low that, then it's first of all, it's an unhealthy relationship with food. But you're never going to get the kind of nourishment you're looking for. One of the things that helped me lose a massive ton of weight and really get healthy for the first time in my life was to completely turn that on its head, think about food the way we've been thinking about food for hundreds of thousands and millions of years. How can I get the most amount of nourishment out of this food? And most importantly, and it isn't just food choice. Part of it's food choice, but the difference from humans to other animals is that we process our food before it goes into our mouths. And we have to, because we have one of the least efficient digestive tracts of any animal on the planet. So just because food has nutrients in it doesn't mean that when you put it into your mouth, it goes where it needs to go into your bodies. And in fact, quite a bit of the nutrition that we put into our mouths as modern humans, because it hasn't been prepared properly, passes directly through our digestive tract and goes right out of our body. So part of it is food choice. But one of the things that I'm very, very focused on, and this is where the archaeology comes in, is what kinds of techniques, technologies, strategies can I use and have we used for a very long time to take this raw material, this resource, whether it's a plant, an animal, whatever it is, and maximize the bioavailability and the nutrients in that food so my body can make the most use out of it.
Okay, so I'm also wondering if this kind of dovetails with things that you talk about on your website, like fermentation and different ways we used to process food, if we're looking at it from an ancestral, basically what our great-grandparents used to eat. Is that kind of where you're going with this?
It's exactly where I'm going. So there's two things that, the direct link between archaeology and all my other interests and food and diet and health turns out to be, and it happened when I made the realization that almost every single prehistoric technology has something to do with food. And our ancestors have been inventing tools for, as far as we know right now, the current estimate is 3.3 million years. And for 3.3 million years, almost every single prehistoric technology ever invented has something to do with food, getting food, processing food, storing food, cooking food, sharing food, redistributing food, whatever. And, and if that's true, and we know that our changing diets over time made a direct impact on how we evolved over time, our body size, our brain size, all of this. So certainly understanding diet and our dietary path for millions of years is important to unlocking some key information we need to understand how to nourish ourselves today. But if the technologies used to access food and make food safe, is that directly related to how our diets change? And we must understand those at the same time. And what I focused the past 20 years of my work on is, what were those technologies and how do we apply them today? Because we've lost much of them. Fermentation is a fantastic example. Vegetables have nutrients in them. They do. Whether or not you want to be a carnivore and suggest that plants don't have any nutrients, or plants have toxins as well too, but plants do have nutrients. The part that people really aren't talking about is that though many of those nutrients are in some sort of a state for our digestive tract working alone, it can't access them, or can't access them very easily in many cases. So doing things to that food, the plant, depending on what those nutrients are, how they're locked up, how toxic the plant is, technologies play a crucial role in making that plant safe for us to eat and the nutrients in that plant available to our bodies. Depending on the plant and the toxin, things like fermentation can be a game changer. Sometimes it's as simple as drying. Sometimes as simple as cooking. In terms of something, in terms of maize or corn is the most difficult grain in the world for the human body to completely digest and fully get all the nutrients from. A fantastic example is anybody listening has had this issue, whether you realize it or not, but if you've eaten corn on the cob in the summer, you see it the next day in the toilet, and whole kernels of corn. You should. So, and that is just an example of how difficult that grain is. And that's like a macroscopic example. You see it. But from a nutrient level, many of the nutrients in maize, it doesn't matter if you cook it, grind it up. There's only one technology that makes all the nutrients in maize available to our bodies. It's an ancient technology known as nixtamalization. These technologies are game changers when it comes to nutrition.
Okay, so then hundreds, thousands of years ago, people employed different types of processing because food was still a little bit processed, of course, and our bodies had a better opportunity to get as much nutrient density out of the food as it could. So then today we're not doing that.
No, and here's the big problem, because I need to find another word. Food processing, the term is the right word, but food processing today is an evil term. I mean, we process food. It is to the modern industrial food to the modern industrial food system machine. Food processing means making somebody else a heck of a lot of money on the backs of our own health, and the only thing that they're focused on is shelf life or uniformity or the ability to ship foods, around the world or extract certain amount. That's what food processing today is focused on, and unfortunately, it's almost always at the expense of the very things the goals that food processing in the past were focused on, things like nutrient density or bioavailability or safety in our foods. Those things are compromised with most of the modern food processing today. But the food processing that I'm talking about, complete nose to tail approaches to animals, fermenting, nixtamalizing, slicing, grinding, all of those kind of things, cooking the right way is necessary for humans. One of the traps we get caught in not truly understanding how incredibly inefficient our digestive tracts are as modern humans in these huge bodies with these huge nutrient-needy brains and these really tiny guts. I mean, our guts are 60% the size that they should be for us. They aren't a similar size primate. Is that we outgrew our digestive tracts. We started to do it. We started making all these different technologies, and we're relying on doing these things to our food before we put them into our mouths. It is literally impossible to fully nourish ourselves without implementing some of these technologies. But they're crucial. We absolutely need them. And every one of these things might not make a huge difference. If we don't nixtamalize our maize, not a very big deal. If we don't fully, for some people, if we don't fully, do a long, wild fermentation on our wheat for a real sourdough, it's maybe not the end of the world. If maybe somebody isn't doing a complete nose to tail approach on all their animals, it's not necessarily the end of the world. But the problem is it's in every part of our food system today. Like the lack of proper processing and utilization of our resources is happening at everywhere we turn around. And it's just compounding year after year, decade after decade in our lives. And it becomes a huge problem.
And so we're not as nutrient dense. Our bodies, we're nutrient deficient compared to maybe where we were a couple hundred years ago. Although we have access to such a huge variety of food by going to the supermarket, farmer's market, you name it. But it sounds like we're living in a lack of nutrient density in our body.
100%. And that diversity in our food it's a guise. It's not true. I mean, one of the great, I don't know if you ever saw, what is it? I forget the name of the movie. It's about 15 years old now. It's a great documentary on food. Michael Pollan was in it, and Joel Salz. It was I forget what it was called. Great, fantastic documentary. But the beginning of it, they're pushing a cart to the grocery store, and the narrator was saying, this looks so diverse. I mean, look at all the packaging. It's really all the same thing. It's just packaged differently. I mean, it's all corn. It's all corn. I mean, it's all really basically the same thing. That diversity really isn't true nutritional diversity. A great example is, if you take an animal in our country right now, we eat approximately 55% of a pig and 50% of a cow. If you weigh the animal and then weighed what actually goes on the grocery store shelves, it's about half. Now, that meat, flesh of animals is more nutrient dense and bioavailable than any plant on the planet. But if nutrient density and bioavailability are important to the conversation, and I believe they are, it is the least, or one of the least nutrient dense parts of an animal. The most nutrient dense bioavailable part of an animal is the blood, the fat, and the organs. And that's not on our grocery store shelves hardly at all anymore.
Yeah, it is really not. And I interviewed a cancer researcher about a year ago, and she was saying, you want to prevent cancer, eat more organ meat.
Yeah.
And I thought, how do I sell this? Like people are just not. Now, I grew up eating organ meat because my family is from the Pyrenees area of France, French Basque, and nothing went to waste. We were farmers. Have you ever cooked with bison? I absolutely love the taste of bison, and basically it's a replacement for ground beef. Not that I have anything against ground beef. One of the things I love about bison is it's got higher levels of B12, it's got higher levels of zinc, iron, selenium. It's really nutrient dense, and it actually has more omega-3 fatty acids than beef. I'm always trying to get more omega-3 fatty acids. I also love that it contains conjugated linoleic acid. Translation, what that means is it's got some anti-inflammatory properties. And I'm all about trying to lower my levels of inflammation. I'm always telling my friends and family to use more bison. You cook it up just like you do ground beef. Now, it does have lower fat levels, so you're going to have to maybe just not cook it as long and really keep a better eye on it if you're making burgers. But in my efforts to try to get more people to eat bison, I reached out to my friends at ButcherBox and I asked them, can you give my community free bison for a year? And I got to tell you, they did think about it for a couple of days, but then they came back and they said, we will do this for you. They're not doing it for anybody else. So go to butcherbox.com/Enos, then use the code Enos. I know that is a lot of the word Enos. And you're going to get free bison for a year and $20 off of your first box. I honestly don't know how long this offer is going to last. So I really encourage you to sign up today, start using bison. It tastes exactly like beef, but I honestly think it's got a little bit of a stronger flavor. And so I love using it in tacos. I make burgers with it. I crumble it over salads. So again, go to butcherbox.com/Enos. Use the code Enos for $20 off your first box and free bison for a year. It's going to be an awesome summer. I want to go back to a comment you made that we have basically outgrown our digestive tract. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So think about what's happening over the past several million years. And I know it's hard to even think in terms of millions of years, but basically, when we go back 3.5 million years, our ancestors were about 3.5 feet tall and their brains were about the size of my fist. So their nutritional requirements were incredibly low compared to ours. To fuel and maintain and nourish the bodies and the brains of that size didn't require much. They had absolutely no technology. So imagine going outside with just your fingers and your teeth and your toes and your muscles and your eyesight and your speed or lack of speed and collecting food. There's very little you can get. So there's, one thing I want to make sure people do or don't do is don't fall into the trap of saying, okay, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, it was like they walked into the produce section of the grocery store and could just start gathering plants. No, that's not the case. First off, in a grocery store today, there's no seasons any longer. So there's a lot of plants in that grocery store that wouldn't be available, right? First of all, they're all domesticated, but in the grocery store, but also they're being shipped in from Argentina and wherever else. So if you're only collecting food from your local area, you are by default eating hyper seasonally and hyper locally. So there's only a limited amount of plants that are around you that are in the right state that you can eat them. And most of those plants have toxins in them that you can't detoxify because you have no technologies to do this. So it's not like, this Garden of Eden and all these plants and fruits are here and the fruits themselves are much smaller. Most of them are bitter. They have a much lower calorie content than anything we see in the grocery stores today. Almost any of the green things are too toxic to eat. So there's a very limited amount of vegetables and fruits that are available, and the majority of the nutrition in our ancestors' diets were coming from insects. So they were eating a bunch of bugs and a little bit of fruits and vegetables. And this works for them. They're small and they got little brains and it's fine. Then imagine that's your diet, right? Then they start creating tools. And these first tools of 3.5 million years ago are used, we know for sure they're being used to butcher animals in the African savanna. Now they didn't go from gatherers to hunter-gatherers at that point. They went from gatherers to scavenger-gatherers because they weren't killing these animals. The tools they were making were not lethal to be able to kill big animals. What they used these tools for was for scavenging the meat off of the carcasses left behind from big predators on the savanna that made a kill, ate the blood, the fat, and the organs, went off to sleep and digest that meal and left all this meat hanging. So they ran in there with this sharp tool made out of a rock and joined the buzzards and the hyenas that are picking at this flesh, and they're hacking off pieces of meat too. So when they do that, they start ingesting higher quality nutrition that is a little bit easier for their bodies to access the nutrients out of. And that's great. But we don't see a huge change then. We introduce some meat, a little bit of body and brain growth, but not much. It isn't until 2 million years ago, about 1.5 million years after we get meat into our diets, that we invent technologies that allow our ancestors to hunt and take animals down at will. And this is a very significant moment because it's then that they are the predators and they have first access to any part of that animal they want. They're not eating the leftovers from another predator. They are the predator. So they have access to the blood, the fat, the organs, and the meat, and the marrow, all the different parts of the animal. And it's that technological development, all the good stuff, along with they developed fire at the same time, cooking technology that really allowed our bodies and our brains to get the nutrition they need to grow to almost modern proportions. But remember, all of that body and brain growth that's supported by that influx of nutrition was on the backs of those technologies. And the technological developments and the influx of nutrition at that time, because of those technologies, was so massive that not only did our bodies and our brains grow, but our guts shrank in relation to that size. I mean, and our guts and our teeth shrank in relation to that size, which is crazy because you would think if we needed more nutrition to fuel these bodies and these brains, that everything that we had that allowed us to get nutrition from food would get bigger as well. But it didn't, because it didn't need to. We were so efficient at using these tools and doing things to food before we put it into our mouths that we didn't require these big, massive teeth and these big, massive guts. So as our bodies and brains grew, our nutritional requirements skyrocketed. Our technologies, and food processing strategies were, in check and going right along the same, but our guts and our teeth were shrinking. So right now we are at a state where our nutritional requirements are so high that if I stripped you of all your technologies and stuck you out in the middle of the woods naked and said, eat, and you even knew all the behavior patterns of animals, you knew which plants were poisonous and which were safe and all, if you knew all that, you would still eventually die of starvation unless you made different kinds of tools and cooked food and did different kinds of things. And that's why the modern industrial food system isn't even giving you just raw examples of food. They're taking raw ingredients, stripping them of nutrition in many ways, and giving you this, dumbed down version of this food. And here we are trying to feed ourselves. They've done such the modern industrial food system has done such an amazing job of that it had now, in the first time ever in the history of the world, has created obesity and malnutrition in the same person. Like it should be impossible to be obese, because if you're eating the right amount of food, the right kind of food, you get satiated and you get full and whatever. But if you can become obese and be malnourished at the same time, it really speaks to the flaws in that system.
Boy, it really does. So the modern food system today is not doing us any favors. We're sicker than we've ever been. I don't want to get cancer again. What do I do?
Well, I have a PhD in archaeology, and obviously I'm not a medical doctor, but I'll tell you what I have learned from looking at the archaeological record in depth at the way that we've eaten in the past. One, I do believe that industrial nut and seed oils are one of the most evil things on the planet at the moment. And we have made a conscious effort at home that there's no industrial nut and seed oils in our house. And here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen, we listen, we have a full-fledged running restaurant that nourishes the community. We have no industrial nut and seed oils in these walls at all either. So that, I think, is incredibly important. The second thing, if you look at the archaeological record, and this is not news to probably most of the people listening to this, but we introduce animal fat into our diet. The first evidence for it is 3.4 million years ago. We find long bones of large mammals intentionally crushed. And yes, we can actually tell when they're intentionally crushed open with different tools, when intentionally crushed open to access the marrow on the inside. We have that evidence for animal fat, high quality animal fat in the form of bone marrow in our diets for almost 3.5 million years. Industrial nut and seed oils have been in our diets for, about 150, right around, give or take, about 150. And I like to look at that kind of thing to help. Sugar is another, so the first thing that I would tell anybody, and the first thing I do tell people is one of the easiest changes to make is to get rid of all the industrial nut and seed oils, get them out of your cupboard, get them out of your closet, throw them away. Don't worry about throwing away food. It's not food. I mean, I know we hate to waste things today, but when your perspective of what nourishing food is and everything else is, you have those two categories. The everything else part, get rid of it. Just get it out. If you want to put it where it belongs, put the nut and seed oils in the garage, because they were all originally lubricants for machines. Put them all in the garage. The second thing is sugar. If you look at sugar, again, if you look about it from an ethnographic viewpoint to other cultures around the world and from a prehistoric viewpoint, sugar was something we just didn't have in our diets. And when it was there, it was at a very, very, very low level. When I was with the Hadza in Tanzania, there was a moment where we went and harvested some honey from a stingless beehive, and it was, as much as it would fit in my hand. And everybody came out. Everybody was excited because that's like the only sugar they're going to have for the entire month. And everybody had some, and it was great. And they went off, and then they literally had no sugar for weeks after that. So this is our take on sugar. If anybody's interested, number one, I have no patience for fake sugar related things at all. I've been down that road, and we don't use any refined sugars whatsoever in our house or here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. We don't use any fake sugars either. So our take on it is this: if we're going to have something sweet, we might as well get something good out of it too. So we use completely unrefined sugars. So there's a type of sugar called muscovado, which is nothing but press the cane juice out of the sugar cane and let it evaporate. So it's still full of all the minerals, still full of all the flavor. Yes, it's sugar, but you at least get a little bit of nutrition from it and a whole bunch of flavor that you don't get in refined sugar. We use honey and we use maple syrup. Not a lot of it, but we do. I mean, there is that we are modern humans. If you say don't eat any sugar ever, you might be able to hang on to it for a month, but then you're going to fall down that Oreo crack and eat one and then eat the entire package. So we do that. The other thing that we do, and I think this is incredibly important, is we do practice a complete nose to tail approach to animals. And we do this for a lot of different reasons. This is a win-win across the board. Number one, from a nutritional perspective, I mentioned it earlier, not only do we only consume by weight, typically in America, half of the animal, but the half that we don't consume has a lot more nutrition in it than the half we do. So by including the entire animal, we more than double the nutrition that's coming out of a single animal. From an ethical perspective and from a sustainability perspective, harvesting an animal and getting more than double the nutrition out of that animal to feed myself and my family and my community sits a lot better with me than throwing half of it away or disposing of half, or half goes to pet food or wherever that other half is going.
I grew up plucking chickens, so I completely understand that as well. When you bring in this boneless, skinless chicken breast, I say boneless, skinless, tasteless. Like it just doesn't taste like when I grew up. And so the more we can eat the whole animal, I think the better off we're going to be. But I'm sure there's also confusion for people. And this is what I'd love you to speak to. They want to take a couple of steps. Mm-hmm. Where's a good place for them to start?
One of the problems we see with people that are really excited about taking this very important step towards a more ancestrally based diet or lifestyle in general is to try to do everything at the same time. And it's overwhelming to do it that way. To take certain steps, sort of very measured steps, gives you a lot of opportunities. Number one, to give yourself a break. Number two, to realize that every step you take is a step in the right direction. It's a positive step. And even if it's the tiniest, smallest step, those small steps build up day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, and make incredibly huge impacts over the long term. So my book, Eat Like a Human, outlines a whole bunch of information about our ancestral diets and then breaks down in each chapter different food categories, grains, animals, plants, maize, all sorts of things. Talks a little bit about the increasing nutritional density and bioavailability and safety in our foods. And then it has a whole bunch of recipes. In fact, that book was written because I wanted to share how we learn to nourish our family with the world.
So, Bill, I mean, again, for people who maybe are just thinking, where do I start? I normally shop at my local supermarket.
Yeah, if milk is something, and we didn't even get a chance, unfortunately, to talk about milk, but milk is a foundational food. Milk is literally the one thing that we spent this entire time talking about all the foods that we eat that our bodies are not designed to consume. Milk is the one food that humans are 100% designed to efficiently and safely derive nutrition from for a short period of time when we're infants. Then we lose a lot of that ability. But high quality raw milk that's been fermented is replicating a lot of what happened in our digestive tracts as infants. And that is something we do include in our diet. So really high quality cheese, really high quality kefir, really high quality yogurt. These are foods that I believe are absolutely incredible. Raw milk is unfortunately very illegal in many parts of this country. A great resource for raw milk is the Weston Price Foundation. And they have I think it's called realmilkfinder.org, but they can tell you where in the country you can legally get milk. And there's a lot of great information about raw milk and a lot of great information about that as well. There are farm directories in a lot of different states. A lot of them are using great GIS software to help you connect with farmers. But farmers markets, I mean, there's nothing more, the only thing more visceral, right, and connective than going to a farmer's market is actually being a farmer or raising animals or going out there, going foraging yourself.
And I couldn't agree more. I never miss my local farmer's market. I shake hands. I kiss babies. I do all the things. And I live in Seattle where it's raining all the time. And I go rain or shine because they are there. They're growing food of such a high nutrient density that consuming that food is almost like taking a vitamin pill. Well, Dr. Bill Schindler, I just want to thank you for coming on my podcast, Why Did I Get Cancer?
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me today on the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I've got my shopping guide for all of my cancer self-care items in the show notes, along with information about today's guest and our show sponsors. And don't forget to subscribe to my podcast so you never miss an episode. Keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a gal that got diagnosed with cancer and wanted answers. If you need medical advice, please be sure to consult with a medical professional. And thank you for listening.